everybody, this is the weekend. So it was around the time of, maybe it was 2016 or 2017 when they had made, Cinderella. And I thought to myself, are they gonna make, all of the classical Disney movies in live action version? They had already, done a couple of them and I had not been impressed by them. But it was around this point where I really started to actually fucking hate the entire concept of this. And when I got the word out that they were going to make The Lion King as a live action remake, then I said, they have gone insane. Nobody wants to see that. I mean, it is a movie with entirely talking animals in a natural setting. It's never going to work as a live action movie. What is this? Is it an adventure movie? Is it an animation movie? Is it a fucked up nature documentary? What is this? And I was extremely confident that this was going to be the end of the Disney live action remake, simply because this was going to be a massive bomb because nobody wants to see this. That was what I thought. Turns out that because Lion King is this super beloved classic and is on many people's list as their favorite animated Disney movie of all time, it became a huge success, and it took them another 6 years until maybe the debacle of Snow White, which I at this point have not seen, maybe was the nail in the coffin for the attempt at remaking and rehashing all of these things. Now, I have always maintained that I kind of understand why they, did, new versions of Cinderella, and they did new versions of Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and the stuff like that. And I thought to myself, I can at least understand this from a storytelling perspective. But I never understood why people actually really liked, the Jungle Book that came out, 2016 or whatever it was. I thought, this is just a bunch of animals and they really can't emote anything. And when you just scrub away the only human character, you're left with what I would consider one of the worst movies of all time with a budget over $100 million. It is not the worst. That honor still goes to Godzilla and Cats, but this is in the conversation of one of the worst blockbusters I've ever seen. Why? Well, we're gonna take a look at that today. This is my review of the 2019 The Lion King. So we all know the story of The Lion King, right? It's basically Hamlet with animals, where the evil Scar is plotting to take over, Pride Rock by killing Mufasa. Long live the king! And Simba comes back, yada yada yada. This is essentially, a shot-by-shot remake of that movie, which is this movie's biggest problem. No, not the biggest problem, but one of its biggest problems, because simultaneously it made the movie feel like it was, trapped in this endless void, where it at the same time felt like they were rushing things, like, scrapping half of Be Prepared song and, scrapping an entire, sequence with Zazu and stuff like that. But they also found, new ways of increasing the runtime with about 30 minutes, and I have no idea how that felt, because it also felt like this was moving in an absolute glacial pace. And because I knew what was coming, I, just sat there and thought to myself, well, now we're gonna do this, and now we're gonna do this, and now we're gonna do this. Very good way of, creating tension in your movie, morons. At least Dumbo, which I actually consider to be one of the better Disney live action movies. Why? Because they actually, changed the story a little bit and they made it into a different kind of a story. Not, focusing that much on just the animals, but having more human characters. And that's why I think that movie actually works. And that is a hill I am willing to die on. Now, What is the biggest problem with this movie? Because it looks kind of great at starters when you have the sunrise and we have the, you know, helicopter shot until we get the Pride Rock and, you know, Simba is presented. But unfortunately for us, after that we get to see that fucking mouse, and then we have Scar, and then unfortunately they have to talk. And the voice acting in this movie is very, very, very sketchy. Sometimes it kind of sort of works, like John Oliver as Zazu. Beyoncé is not a very good actor, she's a very good singer, and she brings a little kind of a star power to Nala. I'm okay, fine, but the rest of the, you know, voice actors in this movie is quite bad. And it feels like they've, you know, taken the first or second, or sometimes, if they are generous, third take, and everything just feels so phoned in, and everybody seems so disinterested, especially Scar. Will get to him in a second. And because we doesn't have that good of a voice acting, here we come across the worst problem with this movie. These characters cannot emote. They're essentially, you know, burying a loved one and falling in love with the same bland, dull expression on their face. It feels like I'm trapped inside of a Shyamalan movie or something like that. Jesus Christ! So these characters can't emote. Okay, at least we could have, at least in that case, have, you know, some fantastic, you know, color brimming settings to have them with, but we don't have that either, because everything just looks so boring and bleak and colorless. All of these settings and all of these surroundings that they are in, you feel like, you know, some kind of a post-apocalyptic movie. It makes the movie Shadows look like Mad Max Fury Road in comparison, saying, Jesus Christ, it just looks so bland and boring. And at first you are kind of impressed by how realistic these characters looks, but then, you know, 5 minutes later you're not impressed anymore, because you have already seen how realistically looking these characters are, and you kind of start missing you know, what the original characters looked like. There isn't a single character in this entire movie that I think is done in a better way than original. There is not a single sequence in this movie that is done in a better way than the original. And I also have a very, very strong hate relationship with Disney movies and their use of songs. I hate songs in Disney movies. I tend to try to, you know, fast forward to the end of them, because they feel no other purpose than to pad out the runtime, and they are quite boring and quite horrible and quite lame. I do like the, you know, villain song usually, because that is the cool badass villain song, and Be Prepared, well, that is a kind of catchy tune, but the problem is they've cut this thing in half. Way to go, movie. And we also have to talk about Scar. Scar was a pretty damn good villain in the original, even though he became kind of boring and disinteresting towards the, you know, second half of the movie. He is as interesting as he were. Chasing the power and getting the power seems to, you know, be his kryptonite as an interesting villain. But here's the problem. At least we had Jeremy Irons' fantastic performance. Now we have this guy that seems to be as bored as possible and transformed Scar into a villain who was boring the entire time that he was there. And as I said, I don't like the songs in The Lion King either, despite how iconic they are. I just can't wait to be king. Hakuna Matata, I hate you, go away. And as I said, and they completely butchered Be Prepared. But you know what really killed me? It was the fact that Can You Feel the Love Tonight takes place during daylight. You had one job, movie. You had one job, and that was, you know, having a sequence that takes place tonight, take place during the day, just highlighting how boring and bad the rest of the thing looks like. Maybe they thought that it would be too dark and we wouldn't have been able to see what was going on. Well, that is why it was a bad idea of making this into a live action movie. This feels like some kind of a, you know, documentary on Animal Planet or something like that. We're just following these talking animals that does in some cases not behave like animals but feels more like, you know, possessed CGI puppets. I was not a fan of this movie. And as I said, they have added half an hour of this movie to, you know, some other sequences where, you know, we have more interactions with Nala and, you know, more of the, you know, interactions with her and Scar. Fine, I guess, but why were they there? If you're going to make an almost shot-by-shot remake, at least do a shot-by-shot remake so we get out of this thing faster. But they also felt that it was important to spend 3 minutes of this movie following a small string of Simba's hair inside some shit that is being, you know, trotted down by some, you know, bug or something like that, which sums up the entirety of this movie. And I'm not the first guy to make this comparison, but this movie is essentially a small piece of The Lion King stuck in a big old pile of shit. So Disney, why did you have to do this? I mean, for the same money that you did this, you could have made, you know, 4 or 5 mid-card level movies with aspiring actors and aspiring directors, filmmakers that you could make new stars of. You could have made a new Hocus Pocus, you could have made a new Rocketeer, you could have made, you know, something new and something good. But you instead decide to make the most soulless cash grab I have ever seen. And at the time of this recording, early May 2025, I still haven't seen the prequel Mufasa that came out last year. I'll bet you that I'm gonna give that a better rating than this one, because that one doesn't have to compare to its original as this one does. Speaking of Mufasa, why did you insist on having James Earl Jones as Mufasa? You have recasted some characters, and that's fine if you're going to, you know, give them a slightly different, you know, personality, direction, whatever. But the thing was that already back in '94, I thought that James Earl Jones sounded kind of old for being, you know, Simba's dad, but a quarter of a century later, he sounds so old and he sounds so frail that I'm afraid he's gonna keel over and die because of old age rather than the wildebeests. So couldn't you just have, you know, used his old recordings? I mean, you have already made a movie that basically follows exactly the same way as the original did. So why, you know, have him re-record himself where he sounds like he's older than Grandpa Simpson or something like that? I don't know. It was just something that I thought was very, very bad. I will also want to say this. I don't have any nostalgic feelings towards The Lion King whatsoever. When it came out, I was 15 years old. I was the absolute wrong demographic. That was the time where you absolutely hated everything that Disney was trotting out because that was lame and you were too cool for it. You wanted to see people getting stabbed, killed and beheaded, and you wanted to see tits. That's what you wanted to see. You didn't want to see singing animals. That was for kids. So I was never a huge fan of The Lion King, but you know what? All of the live action remakes have done for me. Whenever I've seen them, I have then gone on to see the you know, Disney original animated one. And you know what I've been finding out? That I so much more appreciate the original ones compared to these ones. These movies have been made for the sole purpose that I will enjoy and like and praise the animated movies much more. Weird how that works. But I will still say that The Lion King is not even, you know, on my top 5 when it comes to the best animated Disney animated movies. That's like, you know, Snow White and Alice in Wonderland and Aladdin and The Emperor's New Groove and some movies like that. And in my opinion, however, this is the worst movie that has been. And if you compare the live action to the original, And I don't have anything more to say really than that this is a soulless cash grab, and the fact that this made a ton of money, and the fact that this movie, you know, became so popular that they actually made a prequel, and that they made more of these unwanted and undesired movies, just made me feel like the world has gone mad. I'm just going to say, just for comparison's sake, that the original Lion King gets 79 points. This movie gets 9 points. It is one of the worst blockbusters I've ever seen in my entire life. It is so soulless, it is such a cash grab, which I've mentioned before. This is just such a waste of time, and if you have, you know, seen the original and you have been somewhat disappointed with the Disney live-action remake, this is the worst one of the bunch, and it is the most inferior movie of them all. There is no reason to see this, because everything that happens in this movie happened in the other movie, and it was far, far, far superior in the original movie. And I'm not saying that because I have some kind of nostalgic feelings towards the original movie. It is just recently they have discovered how good the original actually is. There are problems with that movie, and just to make sure that this movie becomes even worse, they just highlight some of the biggest problems and biggest drawbacks with the original one, and emphasizing them to the point where I thought, Jesus Christ, maybe the original is actually not as good as I remembered it. But I rewatched it and found that no, it is actually the other way around. This movie is actually another one of these examples where I actually felt that the original was elevated by how extremely piss poor this thing was. Jesus Christ, this movie. So do you actually like this version of The Lion King, or do you actually prefer this to the original? Comment below, and I'll see you next time from, well, so-and-so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.